Okay, so this video is going to look at the floor system and the roof system, just the basics of the floor system and the roof system inside of Revit. And we'll start with the floors. It's a really simple system to work through at its base level. So we're going to do an architectural floor. And this is going to build a generic floor, 12 inches thick. And if you notice, I am on level 1, so it is going to put this floor the top of the floor is going to be at 0, 0. So that's the potential offset that I have. But I'm going to leave that at 0, 0. So it's going to put the top of the floor at level 1. And it's going to extend that 12 inches down. So the bottom of this floor will technically then be at -1 in terms of its relationship with level 1. So it's really important to note that it's not going to build that up. It's going to build that down in the direction so that it maintains whatever my level 1 is, which right now that's set at 0. If I look at that in plan, it's going to build that down. So that floor is going to come down below this level 1 mark. Okay, so the typical method that I want you to start out with in terms of building floors is not going to be to select walls. As you get more and more comfortable with the system, you can do that. But what I really want you doing is using the line tool and take the time to draw in your own floor. So I'm simply going to snap right around the inside edge of my walls. I'm going to complete the loop, green checkbox, and that gives me a floor. So again, you can see that it's actually extended down below. And when I start incorporating an entire site, a lot of times we'll take those walls and we'll begin dropping those down as well to match. But for right now, where you're at in terms of building your Revit model, that is perfectly fine to see this little gap right there, just knowing how those pieces are going to come together. Okay, so that's really it for floors, right? You know, I can go to level 2 and I can sketch out a different floor. So architectural floor, and put a different floor at a different level. As easy as that. It's a really easy system to start working through. Roofs, however, have their own level of complexity. It's a really excellent tool, but it's a little bit complex as roofs themselves are complicated also. So I'm going to start by going into my elevation view, and I'm actually going to copy that elevation tag up. And I'm going to rename it, oh dear, I'm not going to rename it oh dear, I'm going to rename it roof. There we go. It's a matter of selecting the right piece there. Okay, so I have level 1, level 2, and roof as my top level, right? So on this, right now, I do not have a plan view for roof. So let's look at adding that in. It's going to be view. We are adding a plan view, and we are adding roof. So that shows up in the list now. Now, if you notice, I don't see anything below that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn on my underlay. I've got to find underlay in the list here. Oh dear. Oh dear again. There it is. Underlay, region base level. I'm going to set that to the floor below, which is level 2. And so what underlay does is it gives you sort of a grayed out view that I can't really select, which is really nice, of the floor below. Really convenient. And I can establish that in any of my floor plan views. From here, I'm going to go to architecture, roof, and the first roof system that we'll look at is roof by footprint. So if this were just sort of a standard house, again, I don't want to use pick walls, I'm going to use draw lines. If this was a standard house, we would start thinking about this as a hip type roof going all the way around the perimeter. But as you know, a roof, typically it's not going to be, the end of the roof is typically not right there on the edge of the wall. It's typically offset by a bit. So knowing that, I'm going to go line, and let's do an offset of 2 feet on the lines. So this is a 12-inch thick roof. It is going to be offset 2 feet from where I'm drawing a line. So you can see it's actually doing exactly that. It's placing the line 2 feet away from where I'm clicking. Now, each one of these lines that I'm drawing, you should notice it has a little triangle by it. That triangle is basically saying that this edge is defining a slope. So every single edge of this is sloping up to common points in the middle. So when I click the green checkbox, it is going to build a standard hip roof with a 9/12 pitch. So I get this question almost every time you build a roof, and that is, do you want the walls to attach to the roof? Again, when you're an expert in Revit, oftentimes you're going to click yes. As you're learning Revit, I want you to click no. We want to be able to do that manually. It's important to me that you see the functions that are happening and not let Revit totally take over. Okay, so that is built essentially a hip roof. Now 9/12 is a fairly steep roof, right? So if I want to change that, I can select it. Its properties show up. I can drop that to a 4/12, and it makes the roof a shallower pitch. Cool, pretty simple, and really pretty amazing that it automates this stuff for you. This is not a really easy thing when you're drawing these roof forms out by hand. It's not really an easy thing to accomplish. So if I have an end that, let's say I want to be not sloping, but I want this to end up as a gable. So in other words, this is a hip, but if this came up square across here, square as a triangle. That's sort of a bad term, but that's what I mean. You know, not seeing this slope up with this edge, but actually this ridge coming all the way to the end. That would be a gable end. So I can click Edit Footprint. I can select this edge and tell it that I do not want it to define the slope. So now when I green check that, again, it's asking me, do I want to connect the walls? I'm going to say no, but it's going to give me a gable end. Right? So I can do the same thing with this end, edit footprint, select that edge, and turn off the slope. Cool, so that's how we're starting to get gables and hips to work together. By the same token, if I select this and say edit footprint, I can do a monoslope or a single slope. So I'm selecting all of those edges. I'm going to turn off slope for all of them. So now there's only one single portion of the roof that's defining a slope. So I know from this edge, the roof is going to slope up in this direction. So green checkbox, and no. So now I have a roof that's sloping up to a single direction. So it keeps asking me, do I want to attach the walls to the roof? Let's let that happen this time. So what I'm going to do is select all the walls. So I'm going to hover over one wall, tab key, left click to select. I have this option right here, attach top and base. So I've got that activated. It's going to attach the top of the wall to the roof. And now, anytime I move that roof around, it's going to keep the walls attached. So if I come back and say edit footprint, let's select all of these, make them all define the slope again. Those walls are going to flex and move. If I select this, edit footprint, turn all the slopes off but this one, so we're back to a single sloping, those are going to flex and move. By the same token, this is super easy to edit. So if I edit footprint, I can drag that piece further out to start creating porches, overhangs, all different types of things just by moving that base footprint around. Cool? Now, if I want this to be a flat roof, really easy. I'm going to select this last piece and make sure nothing is defining a slope. Right? So now I have a completely flat roof. If this is a parapet roof, I'm going to edit footprint, and I'm simply going to take all of these pieces and drag them to the inside. And you notice I should be hitting that little lock button on each time, but we'll get further along into that with our Revit understanding later. Okay, that would simply be locking the edge of the roof to the wall. So if I move the wall, the roof would update. So if I green checkbox this, I'm going to say detach target. The walls are no longer below the roof. So this really isn't a parapet now, it's happening up above. But I can simply say, okay, Roof, I might actually rather label this elevation tag rather than roof. It might make more sense to name that top of wall rather than roof, but we're just going to leave that as is right now. And let's just offset this about -4 to put that underneath the walls to build a parapet. Cool. So it's pretty simple in terms of its basic functionality, but we can get more complicated with this as well. Let's go back to, I'm going to undo that, put it on the top, and let's edit the footprint and stretch things out again and get this out beyond the edges of the wall. So one of the other things that I can start to do with the roof, and this isn't exactly what this tool was designed to do, but it's really fun to play around with in terms of building architectural forms. So I can begin flexing and moving the edges of the roof through modify subelements. So with the roof selected, I'm activating modify subelements, and now I can grab either these points or edges and move those up or down independently. So if I take this edge, I can move it up 8 feet, and you can see it starts to shape that roof in a slightly different way than what I'm capable of doing with the standard roof tool. So I moved one end up 8 feet, one end down, and I've kind of created this weird little butterfly roof thing where I can also come in and select a node on the roof and move it around as well to do even more extreme forms. So there's all different ways that we can start shaping and molding and modifying these pieces to make a dynamic roof form. And the advantage of making sure that you use those roof tools, again, are this: selecting all the walls, selecting the roof, and allowing those forms to start to work together. Cool? Delete that little chunk of floor sticking out there. Right, so there's all different types of things that you can start to do to begin to get those roof forms working for you inside of